Good evening, everyone. I am Anusha Chari, Director of the Modern Indian Studies Initiative at UNC-Chapel Hill, and it is a great pleasure to welcome our distinguished panelists, Ambassador Sandhu and Ambassador Verma, to today's discussion about U.S.-India relations under a Biden administration. I'd also like to extend a very warm welcome to our audience. Thank you for being here. I'd like to begin by mentioning that I grew up in India. At that time, India was a highly planned economy with an inward orientation, famous for its licensed Raj and stuck at what was affectionately known as the Hindu rate of growth. A balance of payments crisis in 1991, followed by a big bang liberalization, put India on its current path to economic success. As an economist, I have watched India become an economic powerhouse, the fifth largest economy in the world, and a country with GDP aspirations of $5 trillion. I'd also like to note that this happened by embracing free market principles, which form the basis of the US market economy. And the economic relationship between the two countries has played a notable role in India's economic standing. India and the US had long shared values in terms of democracy and human rights. The last 20 to 25 years have brought about a convergence of national interests as well. In India, the US began to be seen as an economic impulse, not just a geopolitical force. The decline of the Soviet Union, liberalization, opening up the economy, all against a backdrop of shared values, have moved the relationship between the two countries into a much higher gear. India's growth story is unique compared to other developing countries. It is led by the services sector, which accounts for 60% of GDP. It is important to recognize that India's economic transformation was facilitated in part by the Indian diaspora in the United States. Human capital flows have therefore been the underpinning of the economic relationship between the two countries, with tech professionals coming to the US and becoming the bedrock of Silicon Valley and the high-tech sector within the United States. India's workforce, with its fluency in English, makes it a natural partner for US industry. However, a relationship that began as offshoring to India has gradually transformed into a much more symbiotic relationship today. Indian firms have made significant investments in the US, establishing operations and creating jobs, including in innovation hubs like the Research Triangle here in North Carolina. I therefore look forward to a substantive and important conversation today. Now, I'd like to introduce Ambassador Barbara Stevenson, who will moderate today's conversation. Ambassador Stevenson is Vice Provost for Global Affairs and Chief Global Officer at the UNC-Chapel Hill, where she advances the university's global reach, impact, and reputation. During her distinguished 34-year career in the Foreign Service, she was US Ambassador to Panama, the first woman chargée d'affaires and deputy ambassador at the US Embassy in London, and Dean of the Leadership and Management School at the Foreign Service Institute. Previously, she was also president of the American Foreign Service Association. Ambassador Stevenson earned her PhD, master's, and bachelor's degrees in English literature from the University of Florida. She speaks Spanish and Dutch and can read French and Hebrew. Welcome, Ambassador Stevenson, and over to you.
Thank you, Anusha, and good evening, everyone. Welcome. It's such a pleasure to be hosting today's event on U.S.-India relations, and I am delighted to have the opportunity to speak with our honored guest this evening, Ambassador Taranjit Singh Sandhu and Ambassador Richard Verma. I first want to thank Anusha Chari for her leadership, not just in designing this event tonight, but also for leading the first full year of modern Indian studies at UNC. And I'd like to welcome members of North Carolina's vibrant Indian American community who are joining us today. And I know that many of you were involved in the creation of modern Indian studies, so welcome. Modern Indian Studies aims to bring together a wide range of research focused on present-day India, providing students and the Carolina community with the chance to develop a broader, deeper understanding of contemporary India. I am thrilled with the quality of academic work achieved during the first year, and I'm impressed with the foundation that Anusha has built to continue to grow and strengthen this program. When many were daunted by the pandemic, Anusha spotted an opportunity. She conceived of and delivered a superb webinar series on India through the lens of the pandemic, showcasing brilliant scholars across a range of disciplines from UNC and beyond. In addition to serving as a capstone for that successful first year of modern Indian studies, tonight's event also marks the launch of a new series at UNC, Diplomatic Discussions. This series brings diplomats and foreign affairs practitioners to UNC-Chapel Hill to engage with faculty, students, and the wider community on important issues in diplomacy and international affairs. Here at Carolina, we are working to strengthen our capacity to educate students about the theory and practice of diplomacy, and particularly American diplomacy. We seek to build on UNC's standout strengths in area studies, 5 national resource centers, the most in the entire southeastern United States, as well as language instruction. UNC teaches more than 25 foreign languages and some to advanced levels. And we also have great majors like peace, war, and defense, which I'm proud to work with as a professor of the practice. Carolina students who develop a more sophisticated understanding of how diplomacy works will be better prepared to fulfill their potential as members of the next generation of global leaders. Some Tar Heels may even decide to pursue careers in foreign affairs and national security, as I did. Through programs like Diplomatic Discussions, as well as the participation of foreign policy practitioners in UNC courses and co-curricular programs, I can see UNC headed toward the very top tier of US universities for the study of diplomacy, complementing our existing strengths in military and intelligence studies. Both the topic and tonight's speakers give us a particularly auspicious way to kick off this new series and to celebrate the successful first year of modern Indian studies. First, a word on the topic, US-India relations under the Biden administration. This is a rich and consequential topic. Bill Burns, now director of the CIA, and for many years a fellow career diplomat, describes the US-India relationship and its potential in his book, The Back Channel, a memoir of American diplomacy and the case for its renewal. Describing the difficult work that he did to ensure the success of the landmark civil nuclear agreement with India, Burns observes, and I quote, "Despite the difficulties, the reversals, the recriminations, and negotiating brinksmanship, I was taken by the potential of our relationship. India is as remarkable as it is complicated, a democracy of many and competing voices, and without doubt, an emerging great power with a growing role in Asia and beyond. I don't believe it will be an easy or quick task, but building a true American alliance with India is a mission worth our patience and investment." As your moderator this evening, I admit to sharing that view, that building a true American partnership with India is a mission worth investing in. We will hear opening statements from both ambassadors about the potential of that relationship, and then move to questions. First on geopolitical issues, the Quad, China, and then economic issues. And then we'll finish with a discussion of a topic near and dear to our hearts as academics, the potential for a knowledge partnership between our two countries and between universities and institutions in the US and India. And now it is my honor to introduce our distinguished guests. Ambassador Taranjit Singh Sandhu is India's ambassador to the US and has worked on US-India relations in multiple roles throughout a distinguished career of over 30 years in the Indian Foreign Service. He has focused on U.S.-India relations, both in his role as Deputy Chief of Mission, Deputy Ambassador at the Indian Embassy in the U.S., and early on in his career, he was the first secretary at the Indian Embassy, responsible for working with Congress. Prior to his current assignment in Washington, Ambassador Sandhu was High Commissioner of India to Sri Lanka, an important posting indeed. Ambassador Sandhu started his diplomatic career in 1990 in the Indian mission to the former Soviet Union. Following the dissolution of the Soviet Union, he was sent to open a new embassy in Ukraine, where he served as the head of the political and administration wings of the Indian Embassy. He has worked in India's Ministry of External Affairs in various capacities. As his career progressed, he was assigned to the permanent mission of India to the United Nations in New York from 2005 to 2009. And he also spent several years in Frankfurt, Germany as Consul General of India. Ambassador Sandhu holds a degree in history and a master's in international relations from universities in New Delhi. Thank you so much, Ambassador Sandhu, for joining us this evening. We also have Ambassador Richard Verma with us today. Ambassador Verma served as the U.S. Ambassador to India from 2014 to 2017. He has over 25 years of international experience across senior levels of business, law, diplomacy, and the military. Currently, Verma serves as Executive Vice President for Global Public Policy and Regulatory Affairs at MasterCard. As U.S. Ambassador to India, Ambassador Verma led one of the largest U.S. diplomatic missions in the world and championed historic progress in bilateral cooperation on defense, trade, and clean energy. He also served as Assistant Secretary of State for Legislative Affairs and worked on Capitol Hill as the National Security Advisor to the Senate Majority Leader. Ambassador Verma practiced law in Washington, D.C., and is the former Vice Chairman of the Asia Group, a leading consulting firm. In addition, he is a veteran of the U.S. Air Force and the recipient of a number of awards and decorations, including the State Department's Distinguished Service Award. He is currently a senior fellow at Harvard University's Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs and a trustee at Lehigh University. He serves on a number of boards and commissions, including the T. Rowe Price Corporate Board and the National Endowment for Democracy. Ambassador Verma holds multiple degrees, including a doctorate from Georgetown, a JD from American University. Ambassador Verma, thank you for joining us for today's discussion. To kick off our conversation, I'd like to first ask you both to talk for about 7 minutes each about how you see the relationship between India and the United States unfolding over the next 4 years. How important is this relationship? What common interests and values support it? Feel free, of course, to also talk about potential obstacles to closer relations. Ambassador Sandhu, I'd invite you to get us started.
Thank you, Ambassador Stephenson and Professor Chari, for those introductory words. It gives me great pleasure to see the Modern Indian Studies Initiative at the University of North Carolina. I'm glad that UNC Global is launching the Diplomatic Discussion series with a conversation on India-US partnership. My compliments to the UNIV, faculty, and the students. It's also a great privilege to be joined by my old friend going back to 90s, Ambassador Verma, who has been a fellow traveler, if I can use that term, in this journey. Good to see you, Rich. I am also delighted that many members of the vibrant Indian American community, who are the real bridge builders between our two countries, have been able to join us today. I would say there are 3 marks of any friendship, and this would hold good in case of individuals, societies, and even nations. First and foremost is how the friends or partners have weathered the difficult times together. Secondly, whether initial expectations have been met or even surpassed by actions. And third, but not the least, whether both have grown and transformed into bigger and better selves in their own way, thanks to the friendship. On all these 3 counts, I would say India and the United States scored high. As you have said during the introduction, this is my third stint in DC. Each time there has been much excitement, a different challenge, and we came out of it stronger. The strategic convergence that we have now has exceeded the expectation of even the most optimistic strategic thinkers of yesteryears. Both India and the United States have also grown in their own way thanks to the partnership. We have contributed to each other's strengths. Friends, from space to artificial intelligence, from trade and commerce to startups and innovation, defense and security, there is no activity of human endeavor that our relationship doesn't cover. This has largely happened over the last 2 decades. Since the time of President Clinton, successive US presidents have visited India. We have today over $150 billion in trade and over $67 billion in mutual investments. Defense trade alone stands over $20 billion. All major foundational agreements for defense cooperation have been concluded between our countries. The India-US energy trade has crossed $20 billion. The United States is today second largest supplier of energy to India. Remember these figures, be it energy trade or defense, were nearly zero few years back. The India-US partnership has traveled a long distance in a relatively short span of time. India is a young and aspirational society, and the United States is an important partner in our development. India will be soon completing 75 years as an independent nation. This is an occasion for celebration as well as for making renewed efforts to reach for our dreams. The natural question now is, what next? I have said this many times elsewhere. We'll say it again here. We have indeed come a long way, but we do have lots left to achieve, given the true potential of this partnership. In President Biden, we see a strong friend of India. His actions and worldview as a senator, vice president, presidential candidate, and now as POTUS speak for itself. We have identified 5 main baskets or areas for closer cooperation: health, digital, energy, education, and of course, the overarching strategic and defense. I can go into each of these areas in details during our discussions. But just to give you a broad overview, the health basket, the immediate priority for both India and United States is combating COVID-19. We have been sharing our strengths in generic medicines and vaccines with the rest of the world. We have supplied nearly 65 million doses of vaccines to over 84 countries. And you can understand the importance of this. These include not only our immediate neighborhood, your neighborhood, including Mexico and Canada, countries in Africa, Latin America, Middle East, Pacific Islands, and Europe. Between India and the United States, there are 6 ongoing collaborations of vaccine development. Coming to the digital basket, COVID has shown us that digital technologies will play a key role in shaping the new world order. With over 500 million internet users in India and several Silicon Valley-based companies having significant presence, the United States is a natural partner for India. In fact, North Carolina is also home to many Indian tech companies. Whether it is cybersecurity or emerging technologies and startups, there are tremendous synergies between our 2 countries. The other area of convergence is climate change and clean energy cooperation. India has an ambitious clean energy program under Prime Minister Modi, and aim is to enhance the share of renewables in our energy mix to to 40% by 2022. Our Prime Minister Modi will be participating in the Virtual Leaders Summit on Climate Change to be organized later this month by United States, and we are expecting deepening of the partnership in this area. In fact, Secretary Kerry has just finished a successful visit to India today. I would be remiss if I did not speak up about the India-US Knowledge Partnership at this forum. With over 200,000 Indian students in the United States, and most of them in STEM areas, collaboration in the higher education is an area of exciting possibilities. There are opportunities for student exchanges, online education, university to university collaborations. We hope that with its strong focus on India, UNC will take the lead in this area. Coming to the last but most important strategic basket, in recent years, our geopolitical visions have also converged, especially in the Indo-Pacific. In this context, the Virtual Quad Leaders Summit convened on 12th March was an important milestone. With these words, I will yield the floor. I would be happy to speak in greater detail on the partnerships and our priorities during our discussion.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Sandhu. Ambassador Verma.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador Stevenson. Thank you, and Professor Chari. Thank you. Thank you to UNC and to my friend Ambassador Sandhu. This is actually my second time speaking to UNC on the topic of India. I came down a few years ago, the invitation of my friend Swadesh Chatterjee. It's great to be back with all of you again. Ambassador Stevenson helped me prepare to go out to India. If you ever need a mentor to train you to go do the job as ambassador, she is the perfect mentor and friend. So thank you for everything. And to Ambassador Sandhu, as you have said, we met over 20 years ago when you were first assigned at the embassy. I was a young lawyer who had just come off of Capitol Hill. You were a young officer in the embassy, and we've stayed in touch ever since then. And then, of course, when I went to Delhi, you were the DCM in Washington, and then you've had big postings. And I can't tell you how just reassuring it was to have someone to call, a confidant, someone you could call and say, we have a problem, or I have a question. And we were able to do that with each other. And you also gave me very good advice before I went out to India. You said, get out of New Delhi, see the country, see what the young people are experiencing, see what people are building in the country, see what impact America has had. And I did just that. I went to every Indian state, as you know, which was a hard thing to do. But I did it because of your advice, and it gave me such a different appreciation for the issues and for the excitement and opportunities that are in India and in our bilateral partnership. So I'll keep my opening remarks very brief, and I look forward to your questions. But like any former government official, I'll make 3 points. And the first one I want to say is that we have had a 20-year upswing in U.S.-India relations. That is significant. It is unusual. It didn't happen on its own, and we've got to keep it going. But we also should understand how it happened, because it was a mix of policy and personnel and head of state, diplomacy, geopolitics, and so much more. So if you don't mind, I'll do just a quick retrospective on just kind of some of the big things that I think brought us there. And Ambassador Sandhu was exactly right. It was the end of President Clinton's term where things changed. And he did a few things. He finally, for the first time, separated our policy between India and Pakistan. He said, we're not going to try to balance each of these countries off of each other. We have strategic interests in India. We're going to pursue those. And India is a democracy and a friend. And he did that. And he also, for 35 years, the emerging school of thought in the United States was, we've got to prevent India from becoming a nuclear weapons power. Well, the fact is they were a nuclear weapons power. And President Clinton, by the end of his term, became focused on testing and fissile material cutoffs. And it was kind of a tacit acceptance of India's place, which led to a very significant development in the Bush administration. And President Clinton also set in motion the underpinning for a full strategic partnership. When he spoke to the parliament in the year 2000, just about 21 years ago, he laid out a vision for strategic partnership. And he said something really interesting. He said, being natural allies is not sufficient. We actually have to show our peoples that we can do more and we can have a full-scale partnership in this century. And of course, that set in motion the Bush administration and this historic civil nuclear agreement, where for the first time, the United States brought India into the nuclear fold, accepted India as a nuclear weapons power, and significantly went to bat for India in the international system. I think for too many decades, India viewed the international system as skewed towards the powers that had prevailed in World War II and did not have a seat at the table. And President Bush and his team really changed that. And Ambassador Stevenson, you mentioned Bill Burns. Bill Burns was central to making that happen and bringing India fully into the international system. We also started our defense trade in earnest. In 2005, I think we had pretty much $0 in defense trade, $0. Ambassador Sandhu would have the exact figures today. We're well over 20, 21, $22 billion in defense trade. And the relationship on defense is about so much more than buying or selling at this point. It is really about our joint strategic vision for how we go forward together. And then, of course, during the Obama years, I'm somewhat biased, but I thought it was a good run. We designated India as a major defense partner, something that we have done with no other country in the world, which was a huge step forward. President Obama was the first president to visit India twice. If you were to ask President Obama how we got to the Paris Climate Agreement, he would say we could not have gotten there without India, and that his own negotiation with Prime Minister Modi is that what brought the global South forward, that reached this historic agreement. It showed people what was possible in the international arena. We, for the first time, signed on to this joint strategic vision for the Indo-Pacific, again, the precursor for our free and open Indo-Pacific strategy today. That was such a significant document. I remember it was just a 1.5-page document, but the fact that our two countries came together to commit to the peaceful resolution of disputes and standing up for the rule of law and individual freedoms across the Indo-Pacific, that was a really, really big deal. But it took many years to get there. And we had a sense of what a full and comprehensive partnership looked like. Give credit to the Trump administration for keeping that momentum going on the free and open Indo-Pacific, the deepening of defense ties, and frankly, just showing up. President Trump went to India, went to Houston. Those are not small time commitments or commitments in resources, and that's important. And as I look back on those 20 years, so we had all those presidential moves and those policies, but we also had Congress playing a huge role. We had the Indian diaspora playing a huge role. We had geopolitics playing a huge role. It's no surprise that the kind of very kind of deliberate rise of China beginning in the late 90s, early 2000s, no surprise that coincides with a deeper strategic partnership between the United States and India as well. So that's looking backwards. But Ambassador Stevenson, your question is about the Biden administration, and this is the second point I would make. I think the Biden administration is off to a terrifically strong start. Tony Blinken, our Secretary of State, was my counterpart in the Senate for many years as the staff director of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. When the civil nuclear agreement went through the Congress, if you were to ask the Bush administration, they would say there would be no civil nuclear agreement, but for a guy named Joe Biden, who was the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and kind of broke with the Democratic orthodoxy of the time on non-proliferation to support India and the civil nuclear agreement. And obviously Vice President Harris with her roots, Jake Sullivan, the whole team. I think we've got such a team that's familiar with India over these two-decade period. And so last year I was privileged to work on the Biden campaign. We worked, the first time a candidate had put up a separate page of the website just for Indian Americans and U.S. India policy, did a lot of events with the diaspora. So he's got a good appreciation. And we've seen that in these first not even 100 days, 2 calls between the president and the prime minister, obviously the meeting of the Quad, the visit of Secretary Austin, Secretary Kerry there today, complimenting India on its climate leadership. I'll pause there just to think about how different that statement is than just even 7 years ago or 8 years ago, to have our former Secretary of State celebrating India's climate leadership. And so, look, I don't think the relationship needed a reset, but it certainly needed I think a refresh. And we've gotten that in these first 100 days. And how we go forward matters a lot. But I'm super encouraged by the momentum. The final point I make, the third point I make, is beyond what governments do, it really is the people-to-people ties that are the most critical thing in this relationship. And it is what actually animates this relationship and drives this relationship forward. It is the students, it is the businesses, it is the joint research, it is the trade and investment, which is a lot. All those things are alive and well in the research triangle where you're sitting, Ambassador Stevenson. And it is all the ties that come with those contexts. It is the human stories of migration, the sacrifices that were made. And, my family has lived this story personally. My dad tells a great story of showing up in New York City in 1963 with $14 and a bus ticket, basically starting over. And he and my mom were products of the partition, lived a very difficult kind of upbringing in their high school years and their early, most formative years, kind of shaped by conflict, shaped by really a tumultuous time. And they were able to emerge through that, find a new future here in America, but also retain their roots and retain their culture and retain their traditions. And the fact that their kid could go back 50 years later as ambassador is a pretty cool thing, a very American story. And I'll just say that one of those places I got to travel to in India was those places where my mom and dad settled after partition, that one room flat in Punjab where they lived with no electricity or no indoor plumbing. And I got to see the schools where they taught, and all the people that came out to greet me who said that they would not have been there today without what my parents did for them. That was a great moment. I only mentioned that personal story to say there are millions of stories like that. 4 million Indian Americans, each of us have our own stories. It's that fabric that holds us together, and we shouldn't forget that.
That was beautiful. Thank you. Thank you both for those opening statements. I'm going to now move into the prepared questions to start our discussion. And I'm going to start off with geopolitical considerations and something in the news recently, the Quad. And I want to ask you both about that. The Quad, of course, refers to 4 countries, the U.S., India, Japan, and Australia. And the heads of state of those 4 countries recently met for the first time, very early in the Biden administration. So what is the significance of the Quad, and what can we expect the Quad to focus on and to achieve? Ambassador Sandhu, let's hear from you first, please.
Thank you, Ambassador. And I'm just going to take 1 minute to digress. I just can't resist after listening to Rich that the real as the real base of our relationship is, as Rich mentioned, is people to people. And I think it's very significant to keep in mind that in the recent times, from President Clinton onwards, whenever a US president has gone there, thousands and thousands of people come out to meet them. And here I just wanted to mention, when Rich went to Jalandhar, you can ask him, I saw the photographs, thousands came out. Of course, it is for his family, but also he was the ambassador of the United States. So I just couldn't resist underlining that. And I think this doesn't happen in so many places elsewhere. That's the strength of our relationship. But coming back to the very, very relevant question which you have just posed, I think this was a very significant development. This was, of course, the first multilateral engagement at the heads of state and government level. And it started right in the beginning, as Rich mentioned, in the new Biden administration. So it showed the priority that is being accorded to Quad. And also, this was the first time the leaders of 4 like-minded countries, which are market economies, democracies, open societies, came together. But I also want to point out a bit of history on this. If you look back, it was in 2004. There was an unprecedented humanitarian disaster when the 4 countries first time came together. And today again, we are faced with challenges of great magnitude. COVID, it's a great risk, we all know. And not only to health, but also to economic stability. And that's where the Quad initiative this time has very, very practical approach. It's based on 3 concrete initiatives. The first one, of course, is the vaccine initiative, and in which all 4 bring in their strength. The India brings in the manufacturing capabilities. The United States brings in technology. Japan brings in finance. Australia brings in logistics. So the focus is very positive and concrete. And the second one is climate change, and the third is emerging technologies. And we know all these 3 and are absolutely focus areas. And India's own relationship with the United States has transformed. Our relationships with Japan and Australia are also on very firm footing. So therefore, Quad has a very clear practical objective. And that's what has come out clearly from this summit. And if I can just quote my Prime Minister, he said, Quad is a force for global good.
Oh, lovely. Ambassador Verma, your thoughts on the Quad?
Yeah, just building on those really good comments. I think this is a really important architecture for the Indo-Pacific. If you think about our presence in the Asia Pacific, we've got these treaty alliances, longstanding since World War II. But beyond that, we have a series of loose arrangements. And the Quad, for the first time, kind of somewhat formalizes an arrangement between 4 large maritime powers, democratic powers that have a lot of common interests. And so I think it's super important. I would love to see not only the 3 initiatives follow through, but also talk of now the Quad Plus. Are there other like-minded nations that should be part of this arrangement as we think about trade, as we think about global health security, as we think about supply chain diversification? There's a lot we can do. And I'll just say on these 3 efforts, health, climate, and technology, I think these are critically important, and especially the technology one. There is so much that the US and India can do, along with our partners, in setting standards, in establishing a free and open internet, making sure that consumers are protected, that we have the kind of security that people expect. So I think this is going to be really important. The final thing I would say about the Quad, however, is that we can't lose sight of the bilateral relationship, and the Quad should not become a substitute. And again, I'm so encouraged that the Secretary of Defense goes to India in his first 60 days in office. That shows me that he's as focused, and I think the administration is as focused on the bilateral relationship, because that takes tending to. That takes a lot of effort. And again, I think the Quad is an important piece, but it can't be the only piece.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a follow-up question on the Quad. The U.S. has treaty alliances with both Japan and Australia, but not with India. And is a U.S.-India treaty alliance a desired outcome for either the U.S. or India? And if not, why not? What would a partnership between the U.S. and India look like and consist of, if not a treaty alliance committing to mutual defense? And let's start with Ambassador Verma and then go to Ambassador Sandhu on that one.
Sure. I really think of mutual defense treaty alliances, again, a product of the 20th century, uniquely built out of the chaos following World War II and the need to stabilize not only Europe, but also the Indo-Pacific region. Now, there's a reason why we haven't entered into a mutual defense treaty in the last 60 years, because the times have changed. It doesn't mean our partnership with India is any less important. It just means that as we think about this century, we have to have a new architecture. So when I think about a U.S.-India partnership, I call this kind of natural allies absent the alliance. You have the trade piece, you have the climate piece, you have the digital piece that Ambassador Sandhu talked about, the defense piece, you have values and ideas, and you weave these together into a partnership. You don't need a formal commitment on troop deployments in order to make this one of the most consequential relationships of the century. And frankly, I think if you look around Washington, you won't find many people clamoring for a treaty with India. They will talk about increased burden sharing. They'll talk about making sure India and the U.S. have an active role globally. There's a lot we can do together, but I think we have to be much more creative than the 20th century architecture.
Ambassador Sandhu, the last word on the Quad, any part of it.
I would completely endorse what Rich has said. The world has changed, and so has our relationship. And we, as he pointed out, we share a comprehensive global strategic partnership. And as friends and partners, we have so much in common, shared objectives, we face common challenges, and the very fact of the first visit by U.S. Defense Secretary Austin to India itself is a reflection of the shared priorities. And even in defense, if you ask me how is going to be unfolding in the years to come, I would say, look, there's much more co-production happening, co-development, there's DTTI, there are more defense exercises, frequency and scope, and also more industries in both India and the US. And you are aware that reliable supply chains are a very important part now. So there's joint R&D, manufacturing, innovation, experimenting in new domains of cooperation. As I mentioned in my speech, all parts of human endeavor, and as you yourself have pointed out, and I'm sure we are going to touch it, the knowledge partnership and education. There's so much of excitement and so much can be done. But this does not in any way bring down our strategic or defense, which again, as Rich pointed out, as I mentioned to you, it was just a few years back, it was $0. Today, it's much more than 20 billion. And this is still the tip of the iceberg. So there's a lot that would be happening. So I think this partnership itself is very important and significant, not only for both our countries, but what we are doing in world over.
Thank you. I want to turn to, as we survey the convergence of U.S. and Indian national interests, How does China play into this? And Ambassador Sandhu, I'm going to read you a quote from Robert Blackwell and Thomas Wright and ask you to comment on it. They argued last May in a Council on Foreign Relations Special Report number 86. They were doing an overview of what the U.S. needed to do to sort of restore its place in the world. They said this: India was a big piece. New Delhi is convinced that China seeks to replace the United States as the primary power in Asia, that this would be exceedingly bad for India, and that only a strong partnership with the United States can prevent it. Do you agree with that, or would you frame that issue in a different way? And I'll have you first comment and then ask Ambassador Verma.
I would leave it to Rich to comment on Ambassador Blackwell's statement. But let me again tell you very candidly, look, China is our immediate neighbor. It's a rising power. But India is also a rising power. And I will put it, Dr. Jaishankar has very aptly mentioned, the relationship with China is based on three mutuals: mutual respect, mutual sensitivity, and mutual interest. Now, as far as India-US relations are concerned, they stand on its own footing, and they cannot be viewed through the lens of another country. As I mentioned, that there is no endeavor today in which we are not working. I mentioned to you 6 candidates where we are working together on COVID-19. Just a few years back, we had this another vaccine for another virus called rotavirus. And United States and India together worked on it. And the beautiful part of this, the company in India, which manufactured them, actually was founded by a couple which studied in the United States, went back and started a startup. And today they are a very prominent player. So our relationship is much deeper and has a very extensive canvas.
Very well said. Do you have anything to add to that, Rich, before I turn to economics?
No, I think that's really well said. I think our relationship stands on its own. There's no way that the United States could use India as a wedge or a hedge in a broader geopolitical struggle. That's not it at all. And I think it goes back to, what is it that holds our two countries together? We talked about all these areas, but, we shouldn't underestimate the power of our shared values and the shared ideas that hold us together. And that becomes a bit of a throwaway line. Yes, we have shared values, but without that glue, then we become buyer-seller relationship. We become a transactional relationship. That is the reason I would dare say that's why there's 4 million Indians or Americans of Indian descent in the United States. They came here for a reason. These traditions that hold us together, we have shared colonial experience. We are the world's 2 largest democracies. We are constitutional systems. We are federal systems. We have civilian control of our military. We have transparent budgeting. We have the rule of law. We have checks and balances. Neither system is perfect. And we are both working on this quest for a more perfect union. But we can't forget that glue is so essential. And that's what distinguishes us from other partnerships. And that's why I think it just stands on its own in a different category.
Thank you. I'd like to turn to economics now, to the economic dimension of the U.S.-India partnership. And Ambassador Sandhu, what do you see as the most promising? Where do you see the most promising prospects for closer collaboration?
Look, in fact, in the past few years, the economic and financial ties between our two countries have improved in a big way. Investment, the stock of FDI from India to US and vice versa has gone over by 38%. In fact, in just last 4 years. And, we, of course, on the Indian side, we do realize that this is a very important phase when we need to lay out the red carpet for investments and also for economic reforms. And my leadership, right in the middle of the pandemic, went in for the reforms in many areas. In fact, in many of the FDI limits were increased. And the interesting part is that US has emerged as the second biggest source of FDI into India in the first half of the current financial year, 2020 and 21. It has infused $7.2 billion from April to September 2020. And very recently, US DFC is announced its investment in critical infrastructure projects in India. So I would say infrastructure, health, energy, education, digital economy, fintech, these are some of the areas which hold immense opportunity for cooperation between our two countries.
Rich, I'm going to switch to the specific question for the Biden administration, and it's this. How does the world's largest and most advanced economy engage constructively with a still emerging economy like India's? And will Biden's stated focus on workers and wages mean that developing country exporters like India will have a tougher time exporting to the US in the coming years and growing by imitating the Chinese model?
No, I guess I see the Indian economy somewhat differently. And sometimes it's helpful to just look at the year 2030, which is not that far away. And you start to see an India that leads the world in almost every category, largest middle class, largest number of people, the most money spent on infrastructure over the next 10 years. 100 airports are being built today across India. You'll have the greatest migration of people from rural areas into cities. You'll have a country that'll have the third largest military and the third largest economy. So I see this in a very different light. And so that's the positive case. The negative case, I think we have to be honest, is that we haven't really fulfilled our goals or met our expectations on the economic side. And we were talking about China in the previous question. It's always an interesting statistic for me to go back to the mid-1980s. And in 1985, if you looked at the two-way trade number between the US and India, it was $5 billion. In 1985, the two-way trade number between the US and China was $7 billion. It was about the same. It was about the same. Now look where we are today. The US-China trade is 7 times that of US-India trade. So we haven't been able to do what I think we could have done. Now, what have we been missing? Basic things, a bilateral investment treaty, more ambitiously, a trade agreement. So I think we should strive for something like that to give our investors some degree of protection on both sides. But I also think we have to make a better case to the people of America and to the people of India as to why this economic relationship matters to them, especially in a time of growing nationalism and growing populism, where both countries' populations, there's a risk of people saying, bring it all home. Don't worry about, multilateral trading system. We'll take care of ourselves. I think that would be a huge mistake. And so I think as a matter of politics and as a matter of communications, I think we have to really explain to people the impact. Back to the Quad for a second, you'll see that impact in vaccine and health cooperation. You'll see that impact in climate. And so we have to just tell the stories better and create the investment environment. I think the Biden administration can do that. And look, I think the climate issues or environmental issues, given Secretary Kerry's trip today, I think we're going to be somewhat aligned on both countries have an issue in protecting workers. I think we can do that. None of this is easy. None of this is easy, right? Ambassador Sandhu will remember a quote from Prime Minister Modi when he came to the Congress in 2016. He said, "We finally overcome our hesitations of history." Well, a lot of those hesitations are still floating around, and a lot of them float around the trade and economics basket, and we've got to get past that.
That was great. I so want you to tell the story about talking to President Obama about the Paris Climate Change Accord. I just, would you share that story? Because it does kind of get us beyond the just trade balances and things. It's what happens when we work together.
Yeah, no, I tell this story. Well, it was a series of engagements. And again, Ambassador Sandhu will remember this, where Prime Minister Modi or President Obama would pick up the phone and they would actually call each other, unbeknownst to a lot of us, and to try to hammer out the differences on the Paris Climate Agreement. And, you know, we came into Paris with a very different view, which is developed versus developing world. And, you know, the Prime Minister's case to the president was, you know, the United States has been able to grow and pollute and develop to the maximum over a 200-year period. And no one has ever told you you need to hold back anything. And here we are, India, at the maximum point of our industrial development, and you're telling us we have to hold back. And he said, and look, President Obama was very convinced by that. And Prime Minister Modi was not asking for a huge exception. He was just saying, we've got to do this in our own way, and we're not going to be directed to do it. And that, again, that was the magic of Paris, that every country came in with their own nationally determined commitment. But it was that personal relationship that broke through, and president saying to all of us, we've got to figure out a way to do this and get it right. And that's what did it. So a lot to learn there, but you know, it was personal relationships. It was head of state to head of state dialogue. And it was an empathy. It was a diplomatic understanding of each other's very difficult political position.
And how important a role did President Obama think India played in the eventual success of those talks?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, I think I mentioned earlier that once India came on board, Saudi Arabia came on board, Brazil came on board, South Africa, it was a bit of a, you know, tsunami at that point. And that was huge. It was hugely impactful.
I just love that story. Thank you for telling it again. I'm going to now turn to you, Ambassador Sandhu, with an economic question. To sustain India's growth ambitions of 10% a year and a goal of becoming a $5 trillion economy, that will require technology transfers and market access to the U.S. So how does the doctrine of self-sufficiency, and you're going to have to help me pronounce Atmanirbhar, play into these needs, given that U.S. companies will also be relying on access to Indian markets and further liberalization of foreign direct investments? In other words, can Atmanirbhar be consistent with India's growth ambitions? You won't be surprised that Professor Chari provided that question.
I'm sure I understood, but look, I'm glad you have asked that question. You know, Atmanirbhar Bharat, or self-reliant India, this is different from being self-centered. Self-reliant India is a reliant and stronger India. The initiative actually involves India that draws upon the core national strength in order to engage with the world as an important partner for global supply and value chains. It is not an isolationist or a protectionist, but it's to the contrary, it's an inclusive approach. Now, economy, infrastructure, system based on technology, vibrant demography, strength of our demand and supply chain are at the core of Atmanirbhar Bharat. So it's also about the world seeing India beyond just a passive market to an active manufacturing hub at the heart of global value chain. Now, this is a positive and constructive strategy. So I would again underline that it is not that we are going inward, but actually strengthening ourselves to go more outward.
Wonderful. Thank you. I want to turn to our final topic tonight, which is education or knowledge partnership. So India has 150 million young people, college age people, and India will need to educate that workforce for the next century. Now, here at UNC, we welcome many highly qualified students every year, and we're grateful for the many ways that they enrich life and learning on our campus. Some even stick around to become distinguished professors, as we know. How does India's new education policy envision educating this rising generation? And for our part, will we still be welcoming Indian students to UNC in years to come? Is there scope for increased campus-to-campus engagement? What do you see in the future for this knowledge partnership, Ambassador Sandhu?
Ambassador, this is one area which is very, very close to my heart. You know, as I mentioned to you, in the 5 priority areas of cooperation between our two sides, of course, each of these areas are important, but as we discussed, we have 200,000 students, most of them in STEM areas. And just like Rich here, and I'm going to draw his influence also in this area as we go along, just like his parents, you know, I have also, my own father and mother came to study way back even before I was born in 1956 to Ohio State University. They both did their doctorates and went back. So this is something which really contributes, you know, education and knowledge partnership. And it's also involving our youth, as Rich mentioned to you, that he went around, something that's the real strength of our relationship. You know, the innovation, the hunger for drive for betterment, they are the future. And that's why I do feel that in this new education policy, we are pushing on our side too. I've written to presidents of the universities. We want to help out, like I spoke in the initial comments, you know, have campus-to-campus relations, digital education, whichever way, in innovative ways. And now COVID and post-COVID has actually shown to us how important it is to have this partnership using digital mechanism, using whatever is innovative ways, I would say. And we would love to facilitate that. In fact, we have this time around created a special education team in the embassy, which is trying to reach out to the universities and facilitate this. And I already just gave you that example of that company, Bharat Biotech. You know, in India, that made in India vaccine is really, which is catching people's imagination. And just today, I read that Mexico has given emergency approval for that. So that is a couple which got educated here, went to India, have a startup, and have such a close cooperation. So we look forward to this area, and we look forward to your university taking the lead.
We are very excited about taking the lead, and we are so grateful here at UNC. First of all, you came. Thank you very much. And Ambassador Verma, to you too. Your embassy they've been such great partners with us. So I want to really do a shout out to the staff at the Indian Embassy that has been just terrific partners as we've launched Modern Indian Studies. I've got about 2 or 3 minutes left. I could do closing comments or take one question from the Q&A. Do either of you have closing comments you'd like to make, Ambassador Verma?
I do. Whatever. Would you like us to make closing comments now and then?
You know,
it's up to you.
I think. Let me go ahead and see. Do you guys in the back room that have been vetting the Q&A, do you have a good question for me? Oh, here we go. You know, Don Kanak, who is very near and dear to my heart, he's the chairman of our Global Leadership Council and a big environmental activist and quite a thinker on it. He's asked this question. Ambassador Verma mentioned the key role of India U.S. cooperation on climate and reaching the Paris Agreement. What do our speakers see as the big challenges and opportunities for cooperation on climate change leading up to COP26 in Glasgow and beyond?
I'm happy to start and let Ambassador Sandhu go. So I think the big opportunity, again, just thinking in the U.S. India prism, is the fact that India has perhaps the world's most aggressive renewable target already set at 450 gigawatts, I think in the next 2 or 3 years. It's a very, very aggressive commitment. And so there is a lot of positive momentum on that front. The biggest challenge, however, is just in financing that commitment. So climate finance and mobilizing the international community to actually step up to the plate. Someone suggested to me the other day that India might need as much as $100 billion a year in financing into the renewable sector in order to meet that target. No single government, no state agency is going to be able to provide that or leverage that. So much of that has to come from the private sector. And we've got to figure out a way in the Glasgow summit to actually show up and deliver on climate finance. I think not only did we leave Paris, we didn't come up with the financing packages that I think were talked about in that initial round. So I think that's going to be a big obstacle, but I think we can get there.
Ambassador Sandhu?
Yeah, India today actually figures in the top 5 countries as far as climate change performance index based on the Paris commitments. So we have continued. And as Rich has also mentioned, and I would just underline, please keep in mind that it's a country of 1.35 billion people. And we have a huge energy mix. And we are touching everything, even the movement to LNG, to renewables. We have the biggest renewable exercise that is being undertaken, to solar. We are in the leadership on International Solar Alliance. All this together fits into the climate change. And as Rich has pointed out, look, there were some of the challenges, there were some of the promises which have not been kept. But what the commitment of my leadership is that with Biden administration, we are going to work together. It's a work in progress. It will not happen overnight, but it's an article of faith for my Prime Minister. And on climate change, as I've said in this basket, we are going to work with the United States and other partners. And if you actually look into the achievements which we have had, whether it's on the forestation, on LED bulbs, on electric vehicles, now going into EVs, there's a whole lot of areas where there is a lot of excitement, and we can work together with the United States and other partner countries.
Thank you. We've got a couple of minutes left, and I'd like to turn it over to the two of you. I think I'll ask Ambassador Verma to go first and then give you the last word, Ambassador Sandhu. Rich, closing thoughts.
Great. Ambassador Stevenson, again, thank you for the invitation, and Ambassador Sandhu, great to share this evening here with you. Again, part of the reason I reviewed the last 20 years of our history was to remind all of us and all those who are listening about how much work went into it, how many policy choices were made, and that we can't just assume that we will continue on this upward track. So we're going to have to do a lot of hard work to make sure we live up to these great expectations that we've set for ourselves. I really do think this can be the most consequential relationship for the United States of this century. I would mention 5 things that really matter. The personal relationships first, from our people to people, our presidents, our foreign ministers, et cetera. That really matters. Secondly, just building our habits of cooperation and trust. 20 years is not a long time. This is not a 200-year relationship or 250-year relationship. So we've got to continue to have those dialogues, have those conferences, have those summits, and building those habits of cooperation. Third, we need to continue to have our Congress and Parliament involved. We want all of aspects of our government. If you look at the two most kind of signature achievements in the last 20 years, civil nuclear, major defense partner, those came out of the US Congress. Fourth, our diaspora populations, we need to really support them. We need to make sure they're having a good experience. We need to stand up for our kind of minority communities in both countries, and I think that's critically important. And finally, I would just say, you know, the question about alliances, and we don't have an alliance, and I agree that we're not going to have one and we don't need one. But there is that absence of a secretariat. There is that absence of a treaty body. So we've got to remember that it's all these different things. It's the joint statements. It's what Congress and the Indian Parliament does. It's the head of state commitments, and that all gets weaved together. But really, it's about, and I'm going to quote the foreign minister here, it's about strategic choices. It's where and who do you want to be with as your close partner going into this century. And the foreign minister of India said that India has to make strategic choices. I would just say, if you look at the record of the last 20 years, I feel like the US has made that strategic choice. We have made that strategic choice with India. And so, you know, we look forward to building upon that in the years ahead. I'm very optimistic and I'm very excited for what the future brings. Thanks, Barbara.
Thank you, Rich. Ambassador Sandhu, final thoughts.
Thank you. I would say that in supplement to what Rich has said, that it's very important to keep the bigger picture in mind in our relationship. And we must, never descend into silos. And as I have mentioned to you, that there are very clear 5 baskets which have even domestic dimension. So when we hear foreign policy for middle class or foreign policy for domestic this thing, I can assure you that whether it's healthcare, affordable medicines, vaccines, those have a dimension which are domestic. Digital, IT, as I told you, startups, innovation, that basket again. Energy, climate change, renewables, solar, again, that has a domestic. It's win-win. And finally, what we spoke about, the knowledge partnership and education. And I just want to take a minute and just give you just a factual aspect of one of the things what we have spoken about, you know, the vaccines. Look, it's always very difficult to walk the talk. We aspirational, we always say that we need to, this is a global pandemic, we have to work together. You yourself will know how difficult it is. There are always domestic imperatives, but look at it. You know, as I mentioned to you, 65 million doses to 84 countries. And who are these? In Africa, 35 countries. Congo, Botswana, you name it, and I will mention South Africa. You look at Indian Ocean, Gulf, CARICOM, 11 countries, Latin America, including Mexico and Canada, as I mentioned to you, Europe, including United Kingdom. Look, my leadership has actually come out. There's a huge scope for United States and India to partner in many of the third countries, apart from each other. So I do feel very optimistic that there is solid scope. And that's why I said the importance of Quad is that this time we have just not gone for airy-fairy declarations. We have picked up 3 specific areas. And healthcare is something which Indo-Pacific, as we have targeted, is very much looking forward to getting that help. So therefore, I am hopeful, and in continuation to what Rich has said, both our countries will play an important role not only in each other's development, but also for the world at large.
Thank you both. I began by quoting Bill Burns that, India is without a doubt an emerging great power, and that building a true American alliance with India is a mission worth our patience and investment. And I would say to our students out there, I hope that the ambassadors have made the case thoroughly for why bother to study modern India. India is a country of consequence, and this is a relationship of consequence. Thank you both. This has been such a wonderful way to celebrate the first year of modern Indian studies at UNC and to launch diplomatic discussions. You two were superb. And I know my audience, if they were there, if they were able to, they would be clapping hands for you. So thank you very much for joining us, for doing such a great job. Terrific.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks, Ambassador. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you very much.